The oxygen alarm was a soft thing. That was what Sergeant Dara O.C. remembered most. In the years after, not the cold, not the alien architecture groaning around her like a cathedral settling into old foundations, but the smallness of the sound. A single chime, the kind that announced a low battery on a smoke detector, the kind you could sleep through. She did not sleep through it. She was 300 meters below the surface of Karavath, 2 months from the nearest resupply drone, and the suit's readout blinked 18% in amber, low, but not critical. She had done the math before she climbed down here. She had done it 4 times, the way her father had taught her to check her arithmetic on exams. There was margin, not much, but enough. She told herself that and kept walking. The war, such as it was, had ended 11 months ago. The Varrock had not surrendered. The Varrock did not have a concept that translated cleanly into surrender. Their xenolinguists had spent 3 years chasing that particular word through 17 dialects and come back empty. What the Varrock had done was stop. They had looked at the casualty figures, or whatever the Varrock equivalent of casualty figures was, and they had simply ceased offensive operations. No treaty. No white flag. Just a stillness that fell over the contested systems like snow. Humans had called it a victory. The Varrock had called it, as near as anyone could determine, a recalculation. Dara had been a combat engineer during the fighting, attached to the 14th Expeditionary out of Callisto Station. She had spent 22 months building things under fire and then unbuilding them under fire. And she had developed, over that time, a particular relationship with the spaces between living and not living. She knew exactly how much she could spend before the account went dry. She was precise about it. Her CO had called it a gift. Her therapist, the one she'd seen for 4 sessions, and then stopped seeing, had called it dissociation. She called it math. After the recalculation, she had volunteered for survey work, mapping the Varrock systems that had been seeded. Not conquered, never conquered, just quietly vacated. The way you leave a room when the conversation goes somewhere you don't want to follow. Karavath was the 3rd moon on her list. It was supposed to be uninhabited. The structure she had found 3 hours into her surface survey suggested otherwise. It was not built the way humans built things. That was the first thing she had noticed, before the scale of it registered, before her suit's sensor array started throwing up question marks, where it expected rock and found something denser. Human construction was additive. You started with nothing and put things together. This structure felt subtractive, like whoever had made it had started with a mountain and taken everything away that wasn't the building. The corridors were not corridors so much as absences. The ceilings were not ceilings so much as the places where the stone had decided to stop. She had reported it up the chain, filed the coordinates, photographed everything her suit cameras could reach. She had done all the correct things, and then she had kept going down because there was a sound, not a mechanical sound, not the echo of her own boots. Something lower, something that seemed to live in the rock itself. A resonance that her suit's audio filters kept trying to cancel out, and she kept overriding. She knew she was chasing it the way you chase a half-remembered song. Not because you need to hear it, but because something in you refuses to leave it unresolved. The chamber at the bottom was the size of a stadium, and in it, separated by 300 meters of open floor, were 2 of the largest things Dara Osi had ever seen. She had encountered Varrock before. Up close, in the smoke and chaos of Meridian Station, she had watched them move, 8-limbed, the torso like a clenched fist, the sensory cluster at the top swiveling, with a slow, nautical patience that was somehow more unsettling than speed would have been. She had not been afraid of them in a useful way. Fear, she had learned, was only useful when it moved you. When it just sat in your chest, it was ballast. These were not Varrock. These were not anything she had a word for. They rose from the floor of the chamber like outcroppings. Formations that the rock had decided, over some incomprehensible span of time, to arrange into something that resembled intention. Each one was perhaps 40 meters tall. Each one had at its apex a face. She used the word carefully, even in her own mind. Face implied a certain convergence of features, a certain orientation toward the world. But there was no other word for what the stone had made at the top of each formation. The broad, eroded planes of something like a brow, the shadowed hollows of something like eyes, the ridge of something like a jaw, set in an expression that was either very patient or very sad. She could not tell which. The sound was coming from them, both of them. A harmonic resonance, subsonic and ancient, the kind of thing you felt in the back of your teeth before you heard it with your ears. Dara stood very still for a long time. Then she said, aloud to no one, "Well, She named them because she was human and humans named things. The one on the east side of the chamber she called basalt. The one on the west side she called feldspar. She was a practical woman and she took her names from the rock. She spent 40 minutes doing a full sensor sweep of the chamber, logging everything, transmitting in compressed bursts to the relay satellite she'd parked in low orbit. The satellite would hold the data until she surfaced. The data would be extraordinarily valuable. The data would change things. She was thinking about the data and about the oxygen reading that had ticked down to 15%, and about the 4-hour climb back to the surface, when she noticed that the resonance had changed. It was subtle. A shift in frequency, the way a voice shifts, when it stops speaking to the room and starts speaking to you specifically. She did not have instrumentation sensitive enough to prove this was intentional. She had instead something worse. The absolute certainty of a person who had spent years learning to read spaces for hidden danger, and who had just registered that this particular space was not dangerous at all. It was asking, "I don't." She started and then stopped, because what was there to say? She was a sergeant in the Colonial Survey Corps. She had a degree in structural engineering and a secondary certification in xenomaterial analysis. She was not a linguist or a diplomat or a xenobiologist. She was emphatically not the right person for whatever this was. She looked at basalt, she looked at feldspar, 300 meters of open stone floor between them, and the resonance of two very old, very still things, speaking in the only register they had. She thought about the oxygen counter. She thought about the climb. She took a step toward basalt. It took her 11 minutes to reach the base of the eastern formation. Up close, the scale of it was harder to hold in her mind. The stone face rose above her like a cliff, the features rendered in strokes broad enough to be visible from across the chamber but precise enough, at the seams and folds, to suggest something that had been made by intent rather than accident. She put her gloved hand against the rock. The resonance moved through her palm, through the suit's haptic layer, into her bones. She was not afraid. "I don't know if you can understand me," she said. "I don't know if you know I'm here. But I'm going to assume you do, because I've been operating on bad assumptions for most of my life, and this one seems better than most." The resonance shifted again, lower, slower. "Okay," she said. "So, you know I'm here." She looked across the chamber at feldspar. From this distance, the Western formation's face was barely resolved, a suggestion of features in the dimness. She thought about the way the two resonances had been interacting when she first entered. Not just two separate sounds, but two sounds reaching toward each other, falling just short. She had built bridges under fire. She had cut tunnels through contested rock with a plasma torch in one hand and a manual override in the other. She understood the geometry of things that needed to be connected. "How long?" she asked. She did not know why she asked. There was no way to receive an answer, but the question felt necessary. The resonance, basalt's resonance, dropped so low it was no longer sound at all. Only vibration, only the feeling of something enormous and patient carrying a weight it had carried for longer than she had language to describe. "Okay," she said again. More quietly, she checked her oxygen, 13%. She started moving. The chamber floor was not flat. Up close, crossing it, she discovered it was a landscape. Shallow ridges, depressions worn smooth by forces she could not name, fissures that she had to step across carefully, the suit's boots finding purchase on stone that had been here longer than her species. She moved at a pace that was faster than careful, but not quite reckless. She was good at this register. She had spent years in it. She was halfway across when feldspar's resonance changed. It was different from basalt's, higher in its base frequency, quicker to modulate with a quality that she would have called, in a human voice, urgency, or perhaps wariness. She slowed without stopping, reading the sound the way she had learned to read environments. Not as data to be processed, but as a condition to be felt, a pressure, a temperature. "I know," she said. "I know I'm a stranger." The resonance held its new frequency. "I'm not here to cause harm. I'm here because," she paused. "Because why?" Because she had heard something and followed it. Because she was a human being and human beings were constitutionally unable to walk away from a sound that asked without words to be answered. "I just want to help," she said. "I know how that sounds." Feldspar's resonance did not change, but it did not stop. She kept walking. At the base of the Western Formation, she could see the damage. It was old damage. A fracture in the stone, running from the base up through what would have been the shoulder, if formations like this had shoulders. Not catastrophic, not even particularly dramatic, but deep, the kind of structural compromise that in a building you would address immediately before it propagated. The kind that would, if left long enough, become something worse. She understood immediately. Not just what it was, but what it meant. The gap between these two formations was not just physical distance. Feldspar could not cross it. Whatever mechanism allowed them to move, to orient, to reach, it was compromised. Had been compromised for a time Dara could not calculate and did not want to. She looked at the fracture. She looked at her suit's toolkit. She looked at the oxygen reading, 11%. She was a structural engineer. She pulled up the suit's geological analysis suite and ran a scan of the fracture. It processed for 90 seconds, an eternity, and returned a material composition breakdown and a stress map. The fracture was not in the load-bearing core. It was in the external face, the outer shell, which meant it was cosmetic damage that had been messing with something internal. Not structural integrity, but something else, some network of. She didn't have the right word. Not nerve, not muscle, something the rock had that served an analogous function. She thought about how you fixed something when you didn't have the right tools, when you didn't have the right materials, when you didn't have the right time. You found what you had and you used it precisely. She unclipped the emergency bonding compound from her suit's hip kit. It was rated for hull repairs in vacuum, designed to form a temporary seal on anything from composites to nickel iron to regolith-infused alloys. She had used it on worse things than this. In worse circumstances than this. She had used it with her hands shaking and the sights out and someone shouting coordinates over a tactical channel. No one was shouting now. The chamber was very quiet except for the resonance. She pressed her hand against the fracture line and started working. It took 47 minutes. Not because the compound was difficult to apply. She had done it faster under fire. But because the fracture was longer than it had looked, and deeper in places, and because she was doing it properly. She was doing it the way you did things that mattered, not the way you did things when you just needed them to hold for the next 5 minutes. She packed the compound in layers, each one cured by her suit's UV lamp before the next went on, building up the fill the way she would fill a crack in a load-bearing wall. Thin lifts, no voids, full contact throughout. The oxygen counter hit 7% while she was finishing the last section. She was aware of it. She had been aware of it for the last 20 minutes in the precise, calm, mathematical way she was aware of all countdowns. The climb was 4 hours. She had enough for approximately 42 minutes at her current exertion level. She had known this when she started. She had started anyway. She pressed the final application of compound into the top of the fracture and smoothed it with the flat of her trowel and held the UV lamp against it until the cure light went green. Then she stepped back and looked at her work. It was not beautiful. It never was. Repair work was honest and unglamorous. It preserved function without restoring form, and if you loved it for what it accomplished, not for how it looked. But it was solid. She was certain of that, with the quiet authority of someone who had been certain of structural assessments in conditions far more uncertain than this. She looked up at Feldspar's face. The stone features, the deep-set hollows, the patience or sadness she still couldn't categorize. "Try," she said. The movement was so slow at first that she thought she was imagining it. A tectonic patience, a geological willingness to wait for the right moment and then take it. Feldspar shifted. Not quickly, not dramatically. The way mountains move, which is not the way people think about movement, which takes lifetimes to become visible. Except that it was becoming visible, here, in this chamber, over the course of minutes rather than millennia. Toward basalt, the resonance changed completely. Both of them simultaneously. The two frequencies aligning, finding each other the way two notes find a chord, settling into something that was not music, but was the thing that preceded music, the condition of harmony before it becomes sound. Dara felt it in her chest. She felt it in the old fracture in her collarbone from Meridian Station. She felt it in the 3 cracked ribs from the decompression event on Callisto, that the medics had told her were healed. But that still tightened in cold. She sat down on the chamber floor. She had not sat down in approximately 6 hours. She was suddenly aware of this. She was aware of a great many things, in the way that the body tallies its debts when the immediate crisis has passed. The ache in her hands from the compound work, the dry itch of recycled air in her throat, the particular exhaustion that came not from physical effort but from sustained precision. Oxygen 6%. She looked at the readout for a long moment. Then she looked up at the two formations moving toward each other, with their impossible patience. The resonance between them, filling the chamber like something that had been waiting a very long time to be released. She thought about the climb. She thought about the relay satellite. She thought about the compressed data package it was holding, about the reports she had not filed, and the photographs she had taken, and the material analysis that would tell people things they would argue about for decades. She thought about her father, who had taught her to check her arithmetic 4 times. He would have checked it a 5th time here, and then he would have looked at her with the expression he saved for problems that had solutions he didn't like. And he would have said, "What do you have?" What she had was 6% oxygen, a 4-hour climb, and a suit rated for emergency operation at 3% with cognitive impairment warnings beginning at 4. What she had was a body that had operated in worse margins than this. What she had was the absolute unsentimentality of a person who had learned, the hard way, to spend what she had and not mourn the spending. She stood up. She looked at the 2 formations, now perhaps 250 meters apart. Still moving, still resonating. "You've got it from here," she said. She turned and started walking toward the corridor. She did not run. Running burned oxygen at twice the rate, and she was a structural engineer, not a dramatic gesture. She moved at the fastest pace that kept her heart rate below 140, which was a threshold she had memorized years ago, in a context that felt very different from this and turned out not to be. The corridor was 3 kilometers of ascending grade through stone that did not care about her timeline. She moved through it in segments, not thinking about the whole, just the next 100 meters, then the next. This was another thing she had learned. Large problems became impossible when you looked at them whole. You took them in pieces. You took the piece in front of you, and you moved through it, and then you took the next one. Oxygen hit 4%, somewhere in the 2nd kilometer. The suit's cognitive impairment warning appeared in the corner of her visor. A small amber icon, a little figure with a question mark over its head, as if her own suit was not sure she could be trusted. She dismissed it. The resonance from the chamber below her was still faintly audible through the rock. She thought about that. She thought about 2 things, separated for what might have been an incomprehensible span of time, that had held their frequencies against each other across empty space, maintaining the attempt at connection through whatever constituted patience in a being made of stone. She thought about what it took to not give up on something when every physical circumstance said the distance was too far. She knew what that took. She had watched people do it and fail at it and do it again. She was good at the arithmetic of it. 3%, the suit's alarm was louder now. Not the soft single chime, a repeating pattern, businesslike, designed to be impossible to ignore. She did not try to ignore it, she let it run. It was correct about the facts. It was incorrect about the prognosis. The exit shaft appeared at the edge of her suit's forward lamp. 20 meters. Vertical with the mechanical ladder she had rigged on the way down. 4 rungs per meter, 2 hands, 1 foot, then the next. She had climbed worse with worse, she climbed. Surface light hit her visor and she stopped moving for 3 seconds, just 3. She permitted herself 3 seconds of standing in the pale light of Karavoth's sun and looking at the horizon, which was closer than a planetary horizon because moons were small, and the sky above it, which was the particular deep black of an airless body where you could see stars at midday if you looked in the right direction. She looked. Then she moved to the surface relay she had planted that morning, pulled the emergency rebreather from her kit. 6-hour backup unit rated for light activity, which she had not used because she had not expected to need it, and connected it to her suit's secondary port. Fresh oxygen cycled in. Her suit's alarm went from urgent to routine to quiet. She stood still for a moment and let her body recalibrate. Then she sat down on the regolith and pulled out the manual recorder. Not the suit's onboard system, which was still compressing data for the satellite upload, but the small handheld unit she kept as a backup, which was a habit she had developed in the war when the onboard systems failed with a frequency that made redundancy feel like sanity. She pressed record. "Serve Karavoth Station 3 Day 41, she said. "Secondary surface notation." She stopped, started again. "I found something. I'm going to file the full technical report through standard channels, and that report is going to be accurate and complete. And it's going to describe what I found in terms that the xenomaterial people and the geophysics team and probably some people from the linguistics division are going to want to follow up on." She paused. "This part of the log isn't the report. This part is the other thing." She looked out at the horizon. "There were 2 of them," she said, "in a chamber 300 meters down, which I'll mark in the survey data. I don't know what they are. I don't know how old they are. I don't know if what I observed was intentional on their part or if I'm projecting patterns onto a natural yield phenomenon because I've been alone on this moon for 41 days and I miss people. She considered this. I don't think I'm projecting. She was quiet for a moment. One of them was damaged. I repaired it. I used the emergency bonding compound from my hip kit. Standard hull repair grade, 4 tubes. The repair should hold. I made it properly, not quick and dirty, and the fracture geometry was cooperative. I'm noting this in the log because someone is going to want to know what I used and why. A small pause. Also because I wanted on record that I did it. That I was there and I did the thing that was in front of me to do, even knowing it wasn't. She stopped again. The stars were very clear. She found the one she thought might be the system she'd been born in, and held it for a moment, and then let it go. The oxygen situation was what it was, she said. I've been in tighter margins. I'll be in tighter margins again, probably. That's not the interesting part. She ran her thumb along the edge of the recorder. The interesting part is that they were still trying. Whatever they are, whatever the mechanism. They had been there for a very long time, separated by a damage I could fix with 4 tubes of compound and 47 minutes, and they had never stopped resonating at each other. Like the frequencies itself was the effort. Like the act of reaching, even when it didn't reach, was the point. She let the recorder run in silence for a few seconds. I've been doing some version of that for 11 months, she said. Since the recalculation, transmitting at things I couldn't reach, maintaining the frequency because stopping felt like something I wasn't willing to do. She shrugged. The gesture was mostly invisible inside the suit, a private thing. I thought I was just keeping busy. Turns out maybe I was being told something. She stopped the recording. She sat with it for another moment, the recorder warm in her gloved hand, the surface of Karavath gray and silent around her, and the stars doing what they always did, which was be extraordinarily far away and absolutely present. Then she filed the technical report. The follow-up team arrived 9 weeks later. 3 xenobiologists, 2 geologists, a linguist, and a diplomat who had worked the Varek recalculation, and seemed to have arrived under the impression that diplomatic skills transferred to all unknown intelligences, which Dara thought showed an admirable optimism. They brought better equipment than she had. They brought a portable resonance analyzer and a subsonic communication array, and 17 months of peer-reviewed literature on non-carbon-based cognition, none of which she had read. She took them down. They were very quiet in the chamber. She had expected questions. She had answered questions for 3 weeks straight on the relay channel before they arrived, and she had expected the in-person version to be louder and more demanding. Instead, they stood in the entrance of the chamber, and they looked, the 7 of them, at 2 formations that were now perhaps 50 meters apart, and closing with a patience that made geological time seem impatient. The resonance at 50 meters was not subsonic anymore. It was in the lower registers of human hearing. A hum that lived in the chest more than the ears, warm and layered. 2 frequencies so close to coincidence that the gap between them felt intentional, like the pause before the last note of a piece of music resolves. She watched the linguist sit down cross-legged on the chamber floor and close her eyes and just listen. After a while, the linguist opened her eyes and looked at Dara. How long were they like this before you found them? She asked. I don't know, Dara said. Long. And you just fixed it with bonding compound? It was a structural problem, Dara said. I'm a structural engineer. The linguist looked at her for a moment, with an expression Dara had no immediate category for, something between professional admiration and the particular bewilderment that comes from encountering a form of problem-solving so direct it wraps around and becomes profound. Then she looked back at the formations. They're talking, she said, or the closest thing they have. I can't decode it yet, but she paused. It's not informational. It's not what you'd expect from beings this old, this patient. If they're reporting on centuries of waiting, or detailing accumulated observations, or exchanging survival data, no, it's not that. What is it? One of the geologists asked. The linguist was quiet for a long time. I think, she said finally carefully, it's something closer to delight. Dara filed her final survey report for Karavath on a Tuesday, which was a fiction. The Colonial Survey Corps used a standardized clock that had nothing to do with the rotation of any particular body, just a uniform counting of intervals that made coordination across systems possible. It was a Tuesday on the clock, and she filed her report, and she packed her kit, and she climbed back to the surface for the last time. The follow-up team would stay. There was infrastructure coming, a research station, eventually, Something more permanent than the individual HAB modules the team had arrived with. There would be papers and conferences and the kind of slowest institutional digestion of an extraordinary discovery that took years and produced, eventually, understanding. She would be mentioned in the papers. She was aware of this and felt about it the way she felt about most things she had done that turned out to matter. Not proud exactly, which seemed too loud a word. Something quieter. Something that had to do with the specific satisfaction of doing the right thing at the cost of the right amount. At the surface, she sat down one last time and took out the manual recorder. Caraveth Station 3, Day 102, she said. Departure log. I'm leaving the way I came in. She thought for a moment. The formations. I've been calling them basalt and feldspar in my personal logs, which the academic team has not adopted and probably won't, which is fine. The naming was never for them. It was for me. She looked at the entry shaft. Last night I went down alone before the team was up. Wanted to see it without the equipment and the analysis and the professional context. She paused. They were touching. 30 meters apart wasn't what I'd call touching in human terms, but for them, I think it qualified. The resonance was. She stopped. She tried a different approach. You know when you're very tired, and someone puts their hand on your shoulder? Not because they need to communicate something specific, not because it's going to fix anything, just because they're there and you're there, and the distance between you has closed to the point where closing it further is possible. That's what it sounded like. She let the recorder run. I don't know what I believe about most things, she said. I've been in enough situations where the right call was unclear, where the thing you thought was a gift turned out to be a cost, and the thing you thought was a cost turned out to be. She stopped again. The horizon was the same as always. Small moon, close horizon, stars in the black overhead. I know what I believe about this. I believe they were there a very long time, and they held their frequency, and the only thing they needed was someone to cover 300 meters of floor and spend 47 minutes and 4 tubes of bonding compound. She clicked off the recorder. She looked at the sky. Not the stars this time, but the sky itself, the absolute black that was not empty, but full of distances and frequencies and things that had been reaching toward each other since before her species had learned to stand upright and look up and wonder what was out there reaching back. Then Sergeant Dara Osi, late of the 14th Expeditionary, Colonial Survey Corps, structural engineer, stood up, lifted her kit to her shoulder, and walked to the shuttle. The resonance from below was just barely audible through the regolith, through the soles of her boots, through the patient stone of a moon that had been holding two very old things for a very long time, and had, at last, been allowed to let them go. She smiled at it. A small thing. By far no one. She walked on.